to welcome Anna Ogrenchuk, who will deliver the Sergei Magnitsky Lecture. This lecture was put together to honor Sergei Magnitsky for his tireless efforts to use the rule of law to face up to authoritarianism in Russia. Sergei Magnitsky became famous for exposing corruption and misconduct by Russian government officials. It cost him his life. He was arrested in 2008 and died after 11 months in police custody where he was denied medical care. His assault in custody resulted in his death. The US Congress and President Obama enacted the Magnitsky Act in 2012, barring those Russian officials believed to be involved in his death from entering the US or using its banking system. Sergei received the Heinz Humanitarian Award a few years ago at the Jackson Center. His wife and son accepted it on his behalf. This lecture is sponsored by William Browder, president of the Hermitage Capital Fund in London, who Sergei Magnitsky worked for as his tax accountant. This is the inaugural Sergei Magnitsky Lecture. Here to deliver it is Anna Ogrenchuk. She is president of the Ukrainian Bar Association. She's also co-founder and managing partner of LCF Law Group and a highly experienced solicitor, litigator, specializing in commercial law. For over 15 years, she has successfully represented clients in the most complex and high-profile business litigations in Ukraine. Anna has been instrumental in facilitating and strengthening international cooperation between Ukrainian and foreign dispute resolution experts, judges, legislators, academics, and media. And she has received many awards for her work, including Lawyer of the Year in Ukraine. Anna.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your kind introduction and for the spell and write my surname, which is difficult, I know. So, dear colleagues, dear friends, it is an absolute honor for me to participate in the 14th International Humanitarian Law Roundtable here at the gorgeous Chautauqua Institution. I would like to thank organizers and sponsors of this event. On behalf of the Ukrainian Bar Association, I would also like to express our gratitude to David Crane, who is unfortunately absent today, Jim Jackson, where are you? And the whole GUN team, and of course, each of you, for your support and encouragement in our darkest hour, and for your help in forming a strong legal front to oppose Russian aggression. Never before I've been a commercial litigation practitioner in Ukraine did expect to be surrounded by so many international prosecutors. But now this brings me hope and joy. Speaking here in front of honorable prosecutors, celebrated experts in international law, and outstanding scholars provides me with a chance to speak directly to your hearts and minds of leaders of the world legal community, and to pursue the agenda of accountability mechanism for the crimes committed in Ukraine. I can simply admire your devotion to promote the rule of law. It is symbolic that I am addressing you today in the format of Magnitsky Lecture. In 2009, the Russian lawyer Sergei Magnitsky died in Moscow prison after investigating fraud involving Russian officials. His unfortunate death gave birth to the Global Magnitsky Act, authorizing the US government to sanction foreign government officials worldwide who are deemed to be human rights offenders and freeze their assets. Magnitsky Act establishes a direct link between human rights violation and financial sanctions. The modern system of accountability should build on this approach and strengthen international law mechanism. Bigger threats should come in pair with stronger response of the democratic world. Now we all facing not only fraud by the Russian government, but a disaster compatible only with the Second World War and Holocaust. Before my remarks, I will demonstrate a short video. I do hope it will give more perspective of the horrible situation in our country. Please.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
My name is Yana. A sudden whistling, then silence in the ears and darkness in the eyes. When I opened my eyes, my legs were burning. I tried to leave them, but there were no legs.
She, her brother and their mother are among the 4,000 civilians who got under fire at the Kramatorsk railway station on April the 8th, when they were waiting for the evacuation. The Russian missile Point-2 killed 61 people and injured more than 120. This war did not start on February the 24th, 2022. It has lasted 8 years already and began with the occupation of Crimea and part of the territory of Donbass. Since February 2014, the first facts of Russia's violation of international humanitarian law have already been recorded. Human shields, confiscation of property, forced mobilization, the militarization of children, and destruction of cultural heritage in Crimea. In Donetsk and Luhansk regions, indiscriminate shelling of civilian objects, torture and killing of civilians, extrajudicial executions, and treacherous killing of Ukrainian servicemen near Ilovaisk, shooting down the MH17 plane. Neither the Russian occupation of 7% of the territory of Ukraine, nor the armed aggression and the commission of war crimes over 8 years proved to be enough. The policy of impunity gave rise to new crimes. A full-scale invasion has devastating consequences for Ukraine. 20% of the territory is under occupation. The economy has fallen by 35%, and the damage is estimated at more than $600 million. War crimes, crimes against humanity, and probably genocide have been occurring every day for 6 months all over the country's territory. Atrocities in Bucha, the destruction of Mariupol, rocket attacks on Kiev, Ogrenchuk, Vinnytsia, residential areas of Kharkiv and Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia and Nikopol, nuclear blackmail at the ZNPP, the humanitarian disaster in Kherson and Melitopol, brutal torture and murder of Ukrainian prisoners of war, preparation for show trials, the deportation of the civilian population and children to the Russian Federation. All this is happening in the 21st century in the center of Europe, on the background of the complete inability of the UN, of which Russia is still a member. An armed conflict on such a scale on the European continent became a challenge not only for Ukraine, but also for the whole world. That is why international law should become not only an instrument of fair justice, but also the protection and restoration of the rights of victims and a safeguard for similar conflicts in the future. This is a historic chance for the whole world.
So the sound you've heard just now was the sound of an air alarm, and now it is a part of our daily reality. If you connect your phone to the electronic alarm system in Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, even for a day, you would feel the darkness and horror that overwhelms those cities every day. Our kids are no more to enjoy their childhood. They're trying in vain to save injured adults, bury their parents. Even a war under international law is governed by rules, but obviously Russia plays by their own rules. Unbelievably, the Russian Federation is cynically alleging that all these crimes are justified by the norms of international law. Their decision to launch a full-scale invasion is based on Article 51 of the UN Charter, which grants the right to self-defense, thus, in their minds, absolves them of guilt. Russia was unashamedly initiating before the UN Council a resolution on overcoming the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, despite being the sole and immediate cause of this disaster. And just a couple of weeks ago, it initiated the UN Security Council meeting to discuss the safety issues related to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, currently being occupied by Russia, and shift the blame of possible nuclear hazard to Ukraine. Jurisprudence is being turned upside down. The whole country shamelessly named the aggressive war as a collective security and special operation, and genocide as measures of demilitarization and denazification. Anyone who has read Orwell is not surprised. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Both international law and international legal order face unprecedented challenges, and I strongly believe that not only the future of Ukraine, but also of the Western civilization depends on how we manage to overcome those challenges. Ukrainian Bar Association, together with the international community, numerous legal organizations as New York State Bar Association, IBA, ABA, GAN, and others, have consolidated the response of the Ukrainian and international legal community. We pledge to employ all international mechanisms in this regard, and if there are no such tools, simply create them to achieve the following results: end of war on the ground, punishment of those responsible, and full compensation of damages caused by Russia Federation. Currently, Ukraine has employed most of the available legal mechanisms which international law provides for seasoned war actions by Russia. As we discussed today, on the 2nd of March this year, the United Nations GA adopted the resolution which deplored Russia's invasion of Ukraine and demanded a full withdrawal of Russian forces. Later, both ICJ and European Court of Human Rights have issued respective injunctions ordering the Russian Federation to stop war actions in Ukraine. However, Russia has profoundly and repeatedly ignored them, and the United Nations Security Council was unable to act due to Russia's veto. This is the most dangerous situation. While remaining a permanent member of a body that was created for the exact purpose of preventing acts of war, the aggressor state retains the right to veto, committing at the same time war crimes and crimes against humanity. So our goals are depriving Russia of membership to UN Security Council and suspending Russia's membership to UN. The UN Charter declares its determination to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of human person, in the equal rights of nations, large and small. Now, almost 80 years on, this statement is far from affirmation as ever. The United Nations, as a guarantor of peace, must finally uphold its responsibility to cease acts of aggression and other violation of peace. Otherwise, we must work together on creating a new, transparent and genuine structure of rules and institutions to protect peace. We truly appreciate the unprecedented number of sanctions being imposed by numerous countries on the Russian Federation, as they are of a great help of Ukrainian cause. However, no sanctions are efficient enough while the aggression continues. Russian Federation did not stop the onslaught, but instead arrogantly announced the second phase of the war, aiming to take eastern and southern parts of Ukraine. According to Bloomberg, Russia is still taking in millions from sales of commodities. This year, Russia's oil and gas revenue will be about 285 billion, which exceed even the previous year figure. So we insist on a full economic isolation of the Russian Federation and full oil and gas embargo. It's the only alternative to a very long and damaging war in Ukraine, affecting the world in many ways. Although sanctions can be an effective instrument of pressure, they don't provide a remedy. Therefore, full compensation of all losses suffered by Ukrainian and international businesses, government institutions, and the environment must be an inevitable consequence of this aggression. Ukraine has already put a claim for reparation of losses by the aggression before the ICJ, although we understand that the only body capable to enforce such potential ICJ decision is the United Nations Security Council, where Russia has veto rights. Consequently, the international legal community should establish an international mechanism for damages using best legal practices. The following legal actions must be taken as soon as possible to ensure accountability of further damage compensation procedures. Conducting a thorough audit of all property of the Russian Federation, state-owned companies and individuals who are part of the conspiracy of Russian Federation, identifying all assets of the aggressors and freeze them. We truly praise the establishment in many countries for the determination of their freeze and seize task forces. Developing tools for turning sanctions into real confiscation and their integration into national legislation. And of course, developing tools and mechanisms how we can overcome sovereign immunity. And we are not talking about like criminal cases, but civil cases as well. All aforementioned actions are strictly in line with the resolution of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe adopted in April this year, namely, to use the assets of Russian citizens subject to targeted sanctions for their responsibility in the war of aggression. Once they are confiscated definitely, they can be used to compensate Ukraine and its citizens for any damage caused by the Russian Federation war of aggression. But the main goal of our assembly today is to ensure liability and punishment for each and every perpetrator guilty of crimes. The world security system turned out to be powerless and unable to prevent and stop the largest war in Europe since 1945. One of the reasons is that Russia has not had to account to atrocities committed during earlier conflicts for the last 30 years, starting from Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, and until the recent cases in Crimea and Donbass. And it's our duty as lawyers, attorneys, prosecutors, to ensure the accountability of the Russian Federation officials, as Putin, Shoigu, Lavrov, many others, and their officers and soldiers for the crimes committed in Ukraine. Those are primarily war crimes, crimes against humanity, the crime of aggression, and genocide. So it's a common knowledge now that Russian military commits war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine. National and international experts and organizations document and analyze the most common action by Russian soldiers, including mass killing, rape and torture of civilians, targeting medical facilities, indiscriminate use of cluster munition, willful causing of the great suffering of civilians, murder, abduction, detainment of government officials, targeting of journalists and members of the press, bombing of evacuation and humanitarian routes, forced deportation of Ukrainian citizens. In addition to, let's say, this classic for Russian Federation war crimes, new criminal acts start emerging in the course of this war. For example, the crime of starvation, the deprivation of essential civilian resources as a means of war. Starvation appears to have been a deliberate part of the Russian strategy in Mariupol, a city that has been under siege for months. Russian forces shelled humanitarian corridors and cut off the electricity supply. As a result, countless civilians were killed due to no access to food, shelter, and water. According to the recent news by the US State Department and Yale University, there is evidence of the establishment and usage of 21 sites in the occupied part of Donetsk that are used to detain, interrogate, and deport civilians and POW in ways that gravely violate international humanitarian law. Nearby mass graves hint at the fate of persons held there. We all have heard about the intentional murder of more than 50 and injury of another 70 prisoners of war from Azov battalion who surrendered to the Russian army and were held in prison in Alenivka. So Alenivka case is one of the most brutal crimes committed by the Russian Federation. The above crimes committed in Ukraine and being investigated by ICC, Ukrainian law enforcement authorities, joint investigative efforts. The Office of Prosecutor General of Ukraine informed that since the invasion, more than 30,000 war crimes were registered and are being investigated in Ukraine. In addition, at least 18 countries of Europe started their investigation based on the universal jurisdictional rules. ICC is the key institution to qualify the action of the Russian military. So, as you know, Ukraine recognized ICC jurisdiction back in 2014. Thus, ICC prosecutor was able to start an investigation as soon as full-fledged war began. The working group between the court and the Ukrainian Prosecutor General has been established and mobile groups launched to preserve and collect the evidence. This situation is really unique since investigations were commenced with the speed of light. As Deputy Prosecutor Neshat mentioned yesterday, the scale and effectiveness of cooperation between ICC and Prosecutor General Office of Ukraine reach unprecedented level. We express our immense gratitude to the whole office, to you personally, and to the former office. Thank you so much. However, there are certain risks and imperfections which still need to be improved. In particular, despite the unlimited jurisdiction of the ICC, the government of Ukraine has to ratify the Rome Statute to secure and demonstrate Ukraine's status as a developed democracy. The ratification should be supported by the adoption of the national legislation explicitly acknowledging universal jurisdiction in Ukraine. Increased transparency of investigation and coordination between professional legal communities, civil society. This would prevent duplication of efforts and would enhance the efficiency of the overall response of the justice system of Ukraine to challenges posed by the war. As European Court of Human Rights repeated in a number of its judgments, justice delayed is justice denied. In this case, of blatant and cynical violation of international law and order, expedited proceedings are of utmost importance. Warrant orders and other tools at the disposal of ICC and national justice mechanism would strip President Putin of his support and would prevent further massive recruitment of soldiers. Judicial proceedings at the national level, although speedy, should comply with all guarantees of the right to a fair trial. Ukrainian Bar Association previously suggested international observers' presence in Ukraine so that to guarantee the balance between the speed and quality of proceedings. Ukrainian courts delivered the first verdict to a Russian soldier for murder of a peaceful civilian. Further review of this verdict will create precedent that will have an impact on review of all other cases. Russian atrocities in Ukraine, their ubiquity, the speed, and apparent ease with which they are committed, present the world with the same problem. The Russian troops seem to believe that this is just how war works. The challenge facing prosecutors and investigators is to break this temporal bubble that has long shielded Russia and to end a chain of crimes and a chain of impunity. 8 years ago, Ukraine became the victim of an act of aggression committed by Russian President Putin, and it was the fundamental principle of the prohibition of the use of force against political independence and territorial integrity of another state was violated. I might repeat my colleagues regarding the establishment of special tribunal, but it's just so important for Ukraine, so I would like to re-emphasize it. The establishment of a special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine is necessary, as currently there is no international or domestic court or tribunal that could try Russia's top political and military leadership for committing the crime of aggression against Ukraine. So the creation of a special tribunal closes this gap. Such tribunal will not in any way impede operation by the ICC, but will rather complement its important work. So as we discussed, the tribunal can be established on the basis of the treaty between states or on the basis of agreement with the international organization like UN, EU, or Council of Europe. So the government of Ukraine acknowledges complications in securing votes of the General Assembly. The UN-based tribunal seems to be the best route. However, it should be accompanied by advocacy efforts on all levels, as we have to be sure that, first of all, the necessary number of votes is secured, and secondly, the key states like the US, USA, UK, France, and Germany support this initiative. In view of this, various routes for the tribunal establishment are being explored, regardless of which platform will become the basis of the creation of the tribunal. One thing is certain: the crime of aggression should be prosecuted. Otherwise, we will create precedent having potential consequences for the next generation. For the final part of my speech, I would like to focus your attention on the unspeakably evil, extremely important matter of the crime of genocide. The evidence we have at our disposal shows that all actions described Genocide Convention are being systematically committed by the Russian state, ranging from Russian politicians denying Ukrainian nationhood to Russian soldiers raping Ukrainian women. The war is not a war, but rather an attempt annihilation fueled with fury against everything Ukrainian. A number of countries, namely Canada, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Czech, and many others, have already recognized the Russian action as a genocide of Ukrainian people. However, our task as a law society remains much more challenging. It is to legally prove the intention of destroying the Ukrainian nation and identity. We do understand that international courts have a set very high threshold for proving that. However, according to the recently published independent legal analysis for the Russian Federation breaches of Genocide Convention in Ukraine, conducted by the New Line Institute for the Strategy and Policy and the Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, there are reasonable grounds to conclude Russia is responsible for direct and public incitement to commit genocide, and a pattern of atrocity from which an inference of intent to destroy the Ukrainian national group in part can be drawn, and the existence of a serious risk of genocide in Ukraine triggering the legal obligation of all states to prevent genocide. We believe that today There is ample evidence that Russian policy is aimed at destroying the Ukrainian nation, which is visible in statements, documents, decision of Russian state officials. In addition, all the following genocidal acts been systematically committed in Ukraine: killing and causing serious harm. The evidence in Bucha and other cities are self-explanatory. The Russian soldiers' most common killing methods are hands tied, tortured, and shot in the head from the close proximity. Deliberately inflicting physically destructive conditions of life are seen in Russian filtration camps for Ukrainians. Months-long sieges of Ukrainian cities and deliberate attacks of shelters, evacuation routes, and healthcare facilities, destruction on vital infrastructure, and indiscriminate shelling of the residential areas. Imposing birth prevention measures include mass rapes and inhuman treatment of women and children. Forcibly transferal children of the group. Basically, we have evidence that Ukrainian children are being separated from their parents with a view to having them adopted by Russian families. Public Putin speeches and all Russian elite rhetoric are another clear indicator of genocidal intent. For those who may be wondering why it is so important to hold Russian officials accountable, in particular for the genocide of the Ukrainian people, the answer, boss, is simple and horrifying. These practices are not invention of this new war. Soviet Union employed the same familiar tools of mass murder, deportation, and forced labor, exile, and starvation against Ukrainian people for more than 100 years. Many prominent politicians and experts voiced the necessity to recognize this in the past, starting with 1920, when the first famine was induced upon the Ukrainian people by the Soviet state. However, the second starvation was far deadlier. Between 1932 and 1934, 5 million Ukrainians were starved to death. I do believe that now, since Russia employs the same deadly techniques, is very much the fault of cowardice of past generation when they failed to act to ensure global condemnation. Those and many other acts of Russian genocide against the Ukrainian people are described with a painful accuracy in the article Soviet Genocide in Ukraine by the distinguished Polish-American scholar Dr. Raphael Lemkin, who actually championed the Genocide Convention. So I would like to finish my speech with his quote. For the Ukrainian is not and has never been a Russian. Ukrainian culture, language, religion, all are different. Not only this, but all our desire to live in democratic society governed by the rule of law and based on the Western values, a primary reason of our fight. For this we are paying an immense price. And those words, never again, should not just be a phrase, but a call for action. And the international legal community should join together to survive in those dark times. As Ambassador Hans Korel proclaimed, we need to restore the rule of law. This is the least we could do for the next generation. So thank you very much for your efforts, for your inspiring speeches today. I had so many ideas. I have so much hope that this war will end soon. And like in 1 year or in 2 years, you could come to Kiev and we can have this round table just in the middle of our beautiful country. So glory to Ukraine, glory to our army, and glory to everyone who stands with Ukraine. So to you, thank you.